All right. So thanks everyone for joining. In terms of the agenda, it's a little bit light today in terms of actual separate agenda items, but there are quite a few overlapping issues and PRs I wanted to talk about briefly. And specifically in the area around Keystone V2 versus V3 integration, we seem to have a number of different PRs targeting that area and confusion around which ones are still the way forward versus things that need to be closed, I think, just based on going through this morning and doing some more triage. Before getting into that though, so in the agenda doc, there is a link to a mailing list post I made earlier in the week about new Google Groups and GitHub Teams. So I want to explain what's going on there a little bit, and then I'll pause for any questions. So folks may remember we had in GitHub a GitHub team, SIG OpenStack, that you could CC or ping on issues and PRs. And one of the challenges we had with that group is that we could not actually admin it effectively because you have to be a member of the Kubernetes GitHub org to be added to the team. And you and I can't actually add people onto the Kubernetes org, or at least couldn't at that point in time. And also, as kind of an overall project management thing, I think there's a move to kind of set some criteria for adding people to the Kubernetes org in GitHub. And kind of the other thread of this is there's a lot of GitHub notifications, and following that fire hose, not so much in this SIG, it isn't too bad, but in some of the other SIGs is quite difficult. So those GitHub teams were getting pinged on, lots and lots of issues and making it hard to filter out the email. So the kind of end result of that is now that there have been a number of separate GitHub teams created. So things like in the email there, Kubernetes, SIG, OpenStack, test failures, bugs, feature requests, and so on, so that you can ping specific group or GitHub team for those things. The other aspect of this is that people who are in the Kubernetes org on GitHub can be added explicitly to those teams, but the teams also have kind of a dummy or infrastructure user that's already included in them, which means that when you sign up to one of those listed Google groups, you can get notifications without having to be explicitly added to the team, if that makes sense. And that's basically the long and the short of it. Are there any questions about that? Okay. So we haven't started using those much so far, but just know that those new GitHub teams are there and can be pinged if you want review on issues, bugs, etc., test failures. And that's a way of trying at least to manage those notifications. The other couple of people who jumped in, can I just get you to also add your names to the agenda as it's pending? All right. I'm going to move on to PR and issue review. So I have gone through again and updated the queries, focusing only on issues that have been NPRs that have been updated since the last meeting. The first thing, so the fix invalid node name in OpenStack heat provider PR has merged. So that was a fairly minor change to the OpenStack heat provider, and it's effectively working around a bug elsewhere, but at least means that that very basic check doesn't kick out the provider from working. So I'm not going to focus too much on that. Going down to updated PRs since the last meeting. So this first one, I guess, is where I think we're going to have most of the discussion today, but it does bleed down into some of the other PRs listed as well. And this is around the adding an OpenStack auth provider. And I'm wondering if anyone involved with this PR is actually on the line at the moment, might be able to walk us through exactly what the issues are here. No takers. All right, I guess I'll try and do my best. There's been a couple of attempts, and I'll just link actually another issue in here, which I think Liggett had linked in to this one. Basically, the mechanism by which we do authentication, it's noted here, is that ideally in Keystone v3 in particular, we would generate a client token and cache that to interact with the rest of the components. And I believe that was what this auth provider was attempting to do. But then I think there's been a lot of back and forth about whether the method provided there is correct versus one that shows up in another work in progress PR. I'll just copy across the comment to the notes as well, actually. What I have is kind of 3 related PRs as we go further down the list. This is the first one around client-side hooks to obtain the tokens in the first place in the OpenStack environment variables. And then I think there was a separate one here, 25391, which is the honoring of those on the server side. But just based on back and forth on Slack and also in these issues, it's not clear that there's kind of a cohesive, well understood plan here for how this should work. Anyone have any comments, questions, etc. on that PR in particular or the entire Keystone auth situation?
It does look like we just need to take a step back from what the code is there and just plan out how it should work or what even we want to do. Do we want to allow multi-tenants using domains? Because there's other PRs there for adding username and password off via Keystone as well. And to try and have some sort of coherent idea will be good, I think.
Right, and I get the impression that what maybe we're missing is to try and drag.
I know when I'm reading through the PRs, it's confusing to figure out what the plan is, or if there is a plan.
Yep, I'd agree with that. And I'm not sure there is a plan. I think there's individuals who have pieces of what they understand, but we need to find a way to formulate something a little bit more cohesive.
And I think if we're merging this sort of stuff, integration testing is going to become vital.
Sorry, just taking some notes here. The other aspect of that is I think it would be beneficial if we can identify one or more keystone cores who can help guide us a little bit here, because I think that's the kind of steering that's lacking a little bit as well. Okay. The load balancer deleting, updating when using the cloud provider, the OpenStack cloud provider on OpenStack Liberty. There was a testing failure on this. I don't think from a very brief look it was actually specific to the code that was being put up here, but there's a lot of flakes on this particular one, so it's hard to tell. So that needs some further digging, I think.
This one is actually a particularly bad bug if you are on Liberty.
Yes, and this is, I think we talked about in the last meeting, this is yet another manifestation. So there was a previous issue very similar to this that we fixed, and this is another variation, unfortunately.
I was going to send an email out about it, but I spent a lot of time dealing with the load balancing side in OpenStack, and I think that we just need to probably just refactor what we have. There's a huge file there now with it's very hard to follow the train of thought in the code. So
yeah.
trying to pare it back. I have a branch where I've started it, but it's just taking me time to do.
Yeah. Do you have an open issue or anything just tracking that? I mean, I'll make a note here. Just.
I thought I did, but it might have been closed out with some of the other PRs that merged over the last while.
Yeah,
I can check.
I'll have a poke. It might also just be further down the list here. The next one, add authentication on Keystone v3. I'm actually just going to skip over this because I think this is tied into that earlier issue or PR we were discussing. There's just a number of different things floating around in the area of Keystone Auth for both v2 and v3 and the various different auth mechanisms that they support. And we need a cohesive way to handle that. OpenStack, this again is the heat provider, I believe, add the Swift prefix parameter and generate token. So I did, after the discussion in the last meeting, manage to identify some of the original folks who worked on the heat provider and get some reviews on that. But the outstanding issue is that the submitter of the PR hasn't actually signed the CLA, or at least the bot doesn't think they have. And I did notice just before the meeting they were recently active on a different issue though, so I'm going to keep trying to get to raise that with them and get that sorted out so we can hopefully merge this in the near future. My recollection, just for people who aren't familiar, the main thing this is dealing with is if you are using the OpenStack heat provider to run multiple clusters on the same OpenStack cloud. So effectively, what it's saying is it wants to generate a prefix for the Swift objects so that you can have those not clash with each other, basically. All right. The Rackspace Gopher Cloud to Gopher Cloud migration. There's been some further discussion on this and various people trying to help out, but basically the problem is still that it's an enormous rebase that needs to be done. But still just as important as it always has been, unfortunately. Adding the ability to use the Cinder volume plugin without the OpenStack provider. So there's quite a lot of work that's gone on this. There were 2 questions posed at myself and Angus on the PR just in the last week. And those 2 things are here. So what's the plan with the Cinder V1 to V2 transition? And are we okay that this PR uses Cinder V2 directly in the volume plugin versus in the cloud provider plugin? I wanted to raise those to the broader group. So the Cinder V1 to V2 transition, from my point of view, I'm not super concerned about, but I think what I need to understand is how many folks here are using, if I remember correctly, it was around Juno Kilo that we made the V1 to V2 transition in OpenStack. Are people using clouds with Kubernetes of that vintage at the moment?
Was that V2 API fully enabled in Juno or Kilo? I thought there was some confusion about how long it took to actually get it
So I think it was fully enabled in Kilo. I guess, so the fundamental thing here is, I think what they're asking really is, do they need auto-detect logic similar to what we have for the LBAS stuff, where it will detect whether the cloud has v1 or v2 exposed? And the second question, are we okay that they're using v2 directly from the volume plugin versus the cloud provider? I don't have a strong opinion on, but I am going to throw it out there. And I also am interested in Angus's view on that when I catch him later. Okay. So the next one, control load balancer settings with service annotations. I believe we did have a brief discussion about this one in the Slack at some point. I don't remember exactly what was going on here. Bear with me.
It looks like this does two things. It allows us to choose the provider, which is a good thing, and then also adds in a dynamic setting support for load balancers as well.
Right. So I think when I think it was about a week ago that the author raised it with me on Slack. So it seems logical when it was described to me. I think it's just, it needs actual reviews at the moment. Just trying to look. Yeah, Angus had already reviewed it, I think, actually. But if we could just get some more eyes on that, I think it should actually be okay to go. Okay, and the final lucky winner I have here, OpenStack Keystone Token Authentication. Again, as described earlier, you need an overall plan here. This is just yet another one in the bucket. All right, so I'm going to move down to updated issues. Which there were 5, I think, some of which are further along than others. I didn't actually have a lot of time to do triage on these 5 for the meeting, so apologies in advance. Cinder volume attacher uses node name instead of instance ID. Certainly looks like a valid bug, and I think based on one of the comments, there were existing PRs that at least partially address this. I think that is okay. I think it's actually being worked on by folks from SIG storage. All right, the OpenStack block storage, Cinder v2, I think that's actually related to the pull requests we touched on above, so probably nothing further there to discuss. Kubelet can't register node name to API. And this, I think, was another issue with the differences between host names as OpenStack networking treats them and what Kubernetes is expecting. I think particularly there's a comment there midway through. This is about the host name needing to be a full URL and not just a node name. And the entry is actually the opposite. I think this is again specific to the OpenStack heap provider, if I remember correctly. I think I'm just going to CC the bug review list on that one. It needs further analysis. Kubernetes uses OpenStack Cloud Provider. On a brief look at this one, I think it can actually be closed. It was reopened automatically because it was mentioned in another issue / PR. And the final one, Keystone Auth token used for OpenStack Cloud Provider resources. That, not surprisingly, is the link to the other PRs we referred to earlier. And then in terms of updated issues in the features repository, there's just the 2 things here that I wanted to highlight. They're actually SIG storage items. So they have a feature issue up for discussion around default storage classes for cloud providers. And second one for configurable dynamic provision, aka storage class. I could dive into exactly what the further detail is there. So I think obviously we have dynamic provisioning, but I think there's still some outstanding stuff they're still working on to declare that as stable, which is what this is tracking. All right. So at that point, that's the end of the triage stuff. Does anyone have anything they would like to raise, particularly with regards to KubeCon or OpenStack Summit? I think the selection, so the CFP for OpenStack Summit is still open. The KubeCon stuff, I think people were supposed to receive notification this week, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, everyone I know who submitted received their notifications. My talk wasn't accepted. Someone from the foundation had his talk accepted, but he won't be able to make it. But I'll still be at KubeCon this time around. I also submitted an OpenStack Birds of a Feather, and I haven't heard back about that.
All right. Just keep us posted on that one, obviously. We'll figure it out based on what's available. The other thing I wasn't sure on, have you, or do you know what the process is for working groups or birds of a feather style space for Boston? I know last time it was kind of a separate, not CFP, but a separate survey after the actual CFP was closed.
Yeah, there's actually, I have a prospectus that I can send you about this. We're having what we're calling open source days at the OpenStack Summit, where we're bringing in other projects. The CFP for that closes, I think, on February 20th, but the sooner you get it in, the better. And essentially, you're going to be given an entire day of space to be able to program. The Kubernetes community will have an entire day of space to program however they want. So I can check on the status of that, and let me get a link to the prospectus dropped in there too, so you can take a look at it.
All right, thanks. I think we would probably work with Sarah Novotny or someone like that to work out how to use the entire day.
Yeah, I would guess that we reached out to her, and that she's the person who
yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, I just put a Dropbox link into there with the PDF for the prospectus.
Excellent, thanks. Does anyone else have something they would like to raise, be it regarding any of the issues or features we went through, something else they want to put on the radar, or any of these events for that matter?
I guess I had a question and a comment. The question is about Liberty. So what is the policy of supporting the releases for OpenStack? Because I know that the Liberty release was end of life at the end of last year. Are we just doing this based on actual deployments out in the wild, or what that rationale is?
So, yeah, good question. There's kind of a couple of aspects to that. So one of them is the commercially supported distros for most of the vendors, if not all, I think are still supporting Liberty. And the other aspect is that and I must admit I haven't looked at this recently, but I know when I looked at this survey for October 2016, I think we still had something like 18 or 19% of operators were reporting that they were running Liberty. And I think the key there, I think, is I'm trying to understand how many people are both running Liberty, using Kubernetes on top of that Liberty installation, and using the cloud provider functionality. Because I know from talking to the eBay guys, for example, they are using Kubernetes on a Kilo-based cloud, actually, if I remember correctly, but they don't use the cloud provider functionality. They kind of treat it as bare metal, effectively.
I see. That makes sense, and it is. Yeah, and I think mainly the dropping support means that they're just not taking in new patches for the stable branches upstream, which is too bad, especially if there are more people out there using it. But I guess stable maintenance resources are pretty fine. And the other comment was Cinder v1 was deprecated in Liberty, so it had to be. I think it v2 had to be fully available in Kilo just for pointing reference.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just taking some notes here. And just in terms of that question I'm posing there with regards to running OpenStack less than equal to Liberty, running Kubernetes on it, and using the cloud provider framework, I really am interested in trying to get kind of as many people providing input on that as possible, because I know I have my own view formed on the customers we have, but that's not necessarily exhaustive. And I just want to make sure that we're making the best choices we can be there in terms of some of the stuff about transitioning between various versions of APIs and so on. Yeah.
I know for us, we have a product using Liberty, and we use a cloud provider interface.
Right, and you're with HP, right, Graham?
Yeah.
Yeah, looking at field survey data, there's still a huge chunk of people on Kilo too.
Yeah, that's what I recalled as well. Do you know when I'm guessing the latest data would be coming out closer to the Boston Summit, right?
Yeah, we're finalizing the user survey right now. Just doing QA on the survey, and then we should be releasing that soon for the participants to fill out, and then the data will be ready by Boston.
So yeah, I guess that's the challenge we're getting at with the Liberty stuff, because a lot of the time the upstream OpenStack EOL, where we kill the stable branches, is as some of these operators are only just really rolling onto those releases in the first place, which makes it a little bit challenging from a planning perspective. Right. Did anyone have anything else they wanted to raise?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump.
Sure.
Yesterday about this post that I put up. I didn't put it in the correct mailing list, but I wanted to bring it to the SIG's attention that haven't had really good success deploying Kubernetes on top of OpenStack at this point. Mostly it's been reporting bugs and pushing patches. The main question is what does our CI coverage look like for deploying Kubernetes both through the kube script and then also things like cargo, because I don't see any real coverage, and based on my experience, I'm concerned that perhaps it's because there is no coverage and changes are slipping in that break these things.
So for the OpenStack heat, I'm pretty sure your assessment is correct that there is no CI coverage. And in fact, there's not currently any federated E2E testing period for Kubernetes on OpenStack, as far as I know.
Yeah, I've submitted a request to OSIC to get some resources, some temporary resources at least, to start doing ambient testing of Kubernetes on top of some OpenStack platform. I'm still waiting on the approval of that request, but I'm trying to get some resources to start with.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking out loud. What would the barriers be to, say, using this infrastructure that we currently use for testing OpenStack patches? So basically, Zool and Node Pool. Perhaps seeing if we could schedule some resources to just run on that.
Yeah, we can go to the infra team and ask them about that too. It's hard to know how they're going to respond to that, but I would be, if you, I could do that, or you could do that if you wanted to, and that's certainly something we could try.
I think why don't we both go ahead and do it, because that will probably be the most influential way to do it from both you and I. You probably have more rep with them than I do, but
Oh, I don't know about that, but yeah, I'm just worried that they're going to come back and say that since it's not an OpenStack project and it's not being managed within the OpenStack system, we shouldn't be able to take advantage of this. That's
right.
kind of anticipating they would
Well,
say.
it's going to be quite technically complex to try and implement that as well. Just the way that Zoom and the jobs are set up inside of OpenStack. Trying to federate the back out to GitHub is going to require custom work.
I mean, I could see us doing like an OpenStack, Kubernetes CI project that somehow gets pull requests that trigger that, that thing. It would I guess it would be a bit hacky, and it would be a way that we could possibly have a project inside of the OpenStack ecosystem that can take advantage of those available resources. It's something to think about.
Right. Now, I mean, worst case, what I can do is I also can talk internally and see if there would be resources that could be provided, but I haven't broached that subject yet, so don't hold me to that.
Yeah, I asked for resources too. I asked for some hardware resources, and I was told to go find some public clouds to give it to me. So that's why I'm starting off with OSIC.
Yeah, I think where we got stuck in the past when we discussed this was kind of what Graham was alluding to, which is we almost want the reverse of how the infra stuff typically works, which is we want jobs that run triggered by commits to the Kubernetes and Cargo repositories, for example, and then running not necessarily on master of the OpenStack projects, but potentially the stable branches. But it depends exactly whether you're trying to isolate changes on the OpenStack or the Kubernetes side of the equation. I think our big problem at the moment is the coverage on the Kubernetes side of it.
Yeah. Like, all we need is just a couple of large tenants on a public cloud, because that's something to clean them up. So something like those, I don't know, OSIG are difficult though because they reassign the nodes on a regular basis. Possibly something like OVH. I know they were giving out free resources to developers last year anyway.
Yeah. So on OSIC has two configurations. They have a bare metal cluster which is turned over pretty frequently based off of requests. They're typically targeted towards configurations that users want. But they also have a tenant cloud, which from what I understand is more stable, and it's just a deployment of OpenStack Ansible that's managed by the Rackspace team. Yeah, and for testing, I've spoken with the Kubernetes team at Google, and what I would like, my end goal would be to see the testing be part of their release testing, like they do on AWS and GCE, and have them do it on OpenStack. And they are adamant that it is on a stable release of OpenStack rather than master. They don't want to have to deal with two moving targets.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. I think that OSIC or another public cloud is probably unfortunately, it's probably going to be the way to go, because we can then say, okay, this cloud is on, this release, sort of. But I think the problem is like after my week and a half of working with this, anyone who wasn't as, committed to OpenStack would just have thrown up their hands and just gone to either Google Cloud or Amazon and just left the OpenStack part of the house completely, because I was not successful, and there's always a high likelihood that it's me that did something wrong, but it's not exactly just click and go.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear, and I haven't gotten to this point yet, but I'm sure I'll be there soon too, and we can put our heads together and maybe try to work out some of the solutions and get to a testing framework, because that's good feedback to hear, because I was kind of wondering the same thing. And I know that from the foundation side, like there's a lot of interest from the foundation executives to make sure that Kubernetes is being tested on top of OpenStack.
I've attempted to capture that discussion in the notes. If anyone has anything to add in there, please do. So I think we are at the top of the meeting time that I'd allocated, but opportunity for the last word if anyone has anything else. Alrighty. Thanks everyone for your time, especially that discussion on testing there at the end, because I really think that's one of the most important things we need to try and get our hands around this year. So it'd be beneficial for me to make any progress there. Thanks.